right. Hello and welcome everyone to your first breakout session this early Monday morning. We have a wonderful speaker today. I'd like to introduce Tyler Norris, the lead data scientist for Bounteous. He has a great presentation, will be very engaging this Monday morning, so I will toss the baton over to him.
Thank you, Marie. Happy to be here this morning to present to you guys. Adding ML capabilities to your marketing tech stack without getting lost in the black box, which is admittedly a mouthful. But hopefully as we kind of get through the presentation here today, we'll start to understand at least why that makes sense as a title. Before we really dive in and start the presentation here, I just wanted to spend a couple minutes telling you guys a little bit more about myself. Lead data scientist for Bounteous. Also happen to be lead COVID hair advocate, which I only mention because I still crack up when I see this picture, which was taken a few years ago now, actually. But again, a little bit more about me. I've been working in digital marketing analytics for my entire career, pretty much. I've had the opportunity to work on ML applications in things like search advertising, search engine optimization, so organic versus paid results on Google results pages, paid media optimization, so ensuring that organizations we work with are spending their budgets properly, and then really more things like user propensity scoring, which is what we'll talk about here a lot today. The current sort of digital marketing landscape gives us the opportunity to really start to better understand individuals at that user level and collect their behaviors, so that we can, as an end goal, deliver better experiences, right? So that's really what we'll talk about here today. That's what we at Bounteous call a decision system, right? So how do we build machine learning into a tool that optimizes those experiences for individuals sort of at scale, right? So at that, then let's give a high-level agenda for the day and what we're going to talk about. The first thing we're going to do is talk about this sort of digital marketing landscape that sort of creates this problem definition for us. Why is it difficult or challenging to add machine learning to the digital marketing tech stack? We'll sort of set that up as a very clear problem, go through a tangible problem solution sort of case study that we've worked through as Bounteous really briefly. And then the main thing that we're going to discuss here today is these 5 factors for choosing a machine learning approach for your business, right? So based on these evaluation factors, how can you sort of wade into adding machine learning into your digital marketing tech stack? So what we'll start with here is this like sort of big messy graph that is what I would really consider a fairly standard data architecture diagram that we would see for one of our clients or an organization that we work with. And this is confusing, and it's sort of meant to be confusing because it sort of reflects the reality of what this digital marketing landscape actually looks like, right? Just to do like sort of a quick tour through here, you know, I think that the 2 challenges are, we see that one, often many of these platforms can introduce machine learning for us, whether it's the ability to tack on custom models that we've built ourselves, or through automated machine learning that's developed within the platform itself, right? So a lot of these tools are saying, hey, we can do all this for you. And then on top of that, we see that while there are a lot of arrows going in different directions on this graph from platform to platform, tool to tool, we don't have 100% connectivity. And we don't have sort of one-to-one data translating from tool to tool. So we may get a better picture of a customer in one box than we do in another box. And even though we have data flowing between 2 boxes, we may not be able to join those 2 data sets at the user level very clearly. So again, just to do this sort of like quick tour through here, we'll have like ad tech data in the bottom right. So how are we serving and delivering ads and collecting aggregate data about those users back in our data warehouse. Over on the left side, we have sort of more of what I would consider our own tools in blue. So maybe that's like our website and website analytics. Journey orchestration and website personalization tools tend to be a very common place where you would find the ability to include machine learning models. So, you know, site personalization being, we know something about the user, so let's deliver them a custom experience on the site. Journey orchestration being that site personalization, but also adding in, hey, we know X user is interested in Y product, so let's deliver an email based on what we know about that user. So all of these sorts of tools have the ability to add in sort of custom or automated machine learning. So hopefully what this landscape helps us kind of understand here is that we have a sort of twofold problem. And this is really what we want to set out to answer here in this session today. How do we make the choices between really using these automated machine learning models that are built into these tools versus working with our data scientists to take a more custom approach to machine learning? And then once we've answered that, in which platforms do we actually make these predictions? So this is really where we'll spend our time today, sort of at a strategic level, trying to answer these questions. And the one thing I'll say before we go too far here, I think it's very common for us as data scientists to sort of push away this notion of this more automated machine learning. Like, I've purchased X tool and they have some sort of black boxy sort of algorithm built in that will do something to cluster my users or build some sort of propensity model for me. Again, I think we have this like, we tend to push it away as data scientists, but I think what I would reframe that conversation here today to not reject the idea that we should be using those tools, but more so think about under which conditions should we be using those built-in tools. We don't always have our marketers talking to data scientists. We don't always have the capability to create custom models. So let's sort of evaluate and see when that makes sense. So now that we've sort of defined this problem, I want to go into starting to position a solution here for us, right? So the first thing I would say here is that as we wade into these waters of introducing machine learning into these channels, starting to understand and predict on individual users, we don't do it sort of in an absolute manner. We don't do it all at once. It's not a journey that's going to happen over the course of a month or a quarter, and suddenly we're in this fully automated ML-driven digital marketing landscape. And we sort of illustrate this concept through what we call digital flow here, which is this idea that we start at the very top with experience, with strategy and design. In this case, we're talking about machine learning design. And then we deliver brand experiences at the bottom right. We gather data, and then we iterate and we iterate. That eventually turns into what we call these multi-moment orchestrations over here, which are the process is now happening automatically. That, you know, we have models in production that are learning and being optimized sort of in a production environment. But I would focus more for this talk, this discussion, on that outer ring, right? We learn, we shift strategy, we add in more models, we add in more, we add in models that apply to more channels as time goes by. So now that we've talked about this happening in sort of an iterative manner, I want to go into that sort of more case study that I talked about. And this is like sort of an actual example that we've worked through. You know, I'll start here by like setting the landscape of, you know, this is something that, you know, if we go back to that data architecture diagram, happened across two different channels. We're talking about paid search advertising here. So the first three boxes at the top of Google, where we pay to have our ads show up when a user searches a particular keyword, and website data. So with those two channels integrated at a user level. The problem that the client wanted to solve was that they determined that users who purchased one product were likely to purchase a specific secondary product. So what they were doing was using very, very basic audiences that they had input into their search engine advertising platforms to say, hey, if users bought X product, then we want to make sure that when they search keywords related to Y product, our ads show up. Where we came in and started to iterate over this and get to sort of the second step in this maturity scale was to say, we did some more sort of advanced analysis, which involves some machine learning models, but nothing that we actually productionalized, and found out insights like, for example, not only if user purchased X product, but also had viewed 3 or more pages on their blog, that would make them more likely to ultimately purchase that other product. So we were able to further sort of optimize that budget for them as a result. And then through working and building and growing, gathering those insights, we eventually get to the point where we get to this full maturity on the right side, where we developed a full individual level sort of propensity model where we understood each user's propensity to purchase Y product. So we went along that scale with them. And that's something that I would say, you know, can happen over the course of a quarter, over the course of a month, sort of whatever your appetite is and whatever resources you have internally that allow you to move along that maturity scale more quickly. So that's step number one, right? It's iterative, and we have this ability to sort of, based on our strategy and based on what we want to do for our organization, determine how we start to wade into these ML waters. Now with that, I want to get into the sort of rest of the solution here, which is, we've talked about how and we've talked about when, but what's really the what? What are these factors that are going to help us determine which of these approaches we take and sort of how quickly we sort of scale? And for that, I introduced this enablement model. And I start with this enablement model because this is something we use to sort of define strategy within our organization. And for our purposes today, it really closely sort of aligns with the sort of 5 factors that we're going to use to evaluate our sort of appetite for beginning machine learning in our digital marketing tech stack. So on the right, tech, we have all of those tools on that data architecture diagram that we talked about. At the top, we have talent, which is all of the different groups that we have within our organization that have the ability to take something like this to production. We'll talk in a little bit more detail about some of those common roles that we need to have are. Data over on the left side, we're going to talk about breadth and depth of data. So how many different channels do we have? And sort of what level of detail of data do we have within each of those individual channels? And then methods, we're really going to talk about activation when it comes to methods. So all of these will come together to basically tell us where can we start and which platform should we start? So here's just a quick summary of those 5. And you see that this kind of does translate pretty closely, matches pretty closely to that enablement model that I just discussed here. So kind of in order, I won't say in order of importance, but maybe like more so, in order of how we evaluate these and how sort of easy it is to evaluate these individual factors for our business. So, we'll start here with tech stack, and I think we'll just dive in here. And really the one key takeaway when it comes to our digital marketing tech stack is if we have sort of cohesiveness and we are really bought into one partner, then it's going to be a little bit easier for us to introduce machine learning and also to use these automated sort of machine learning models. So one takeaway here is like, if we're working with an individual tech stack, then hey, we're going to have a quicker path to activation. And I don't really want this presentation to be sort of really focused on individual channels and talking about how we work with platform X to activate and get predictions out to an advertising channel or something like that. But it's really hard not to at least mention some of these high level, like, important players that have really sort of cohesive tech stacks. So I've just called out 3 here, and I won't go into too much detail, but Adobe, Salesforce, and Google Marketing Platform are 3 examples. There are several other out there that have this ability to do a lot of the things that we need to do. So the tools we've outlined here are analytics platforms, sort of experience management or journey orchestration platforms that we talk about. They have this ability to ingest data and change experiences on websites and emails and things like that. And they also have data science applications built directly in. On one end with Adobe, there's a data science workspace where you can work and develop models on your data that lives within this sort of ecosystem, and then push out to other platforms. In the case of Salesforce, they've invested a lot of time and energy in a tool called Einstein, which is a much more automated version of machine learning that sits in the background and is able to find interesting insights in your users that you can activate on. So the goal here is that, yes, cohesive tech stack means that we can move a lot more quickly. The question here becomes then, why doesn't everybody just buy into one tech stack? And I think the answer there is kind of twofold. We find that, a lot of times these decisions happen at different times within an organization. So we stand up a CRM 6 years ago, and 3 years ago, we decided we were going to change our ad serving technology. And, these groups aren't really talking to each other. So we don't really always have that option. And then the second is just cost. These are enormous technology providers with tons of different services that all tend to be add-ons. So if we don't have every tool in the tech stack, it may not be all that simple to sort of streamline the data science process throughout. Which really takes us to our second point here, is that even if we do have a certain amount of buy-in for an individual tech stack, it's not always as easy as it sounds to really complete that sort of integration. We're still going to need data engineers to help us move data from tool X to tool Y. And more importantly than that, close team communication is going to be very important. And we'll talk more about, as we get into those sort of team roles, communication throughout the organization and its importance will really come up here as well. So really quickly then here, I would be remiss if I didn't discuss CDP as we talk about the tech stack within an organization. And CDPs are customer data platforms, are sort of a newer acronym in this whole digital marketing landscape. And the promise of a CDP, I'll explain here, is really twofold. They're going to ingest data from a lot of different sources and do identity resolution to help you get a clearer, more singular picture of each of your customers. And there is also the promise of a quicker path to activation. So taking those individual pictures of users and customers and pushing them out to our social channels and our ad platforms and our email platforms and things like that. We see that here in this diagram with the pink arrows on the left side being that data ingestion, identity resolution, and the blue arrows on the right side being how we activate on that data. Now the reason I call that out here is because one, as we talk about where these sort of predictions will come from and what data set we use to make predictions in any machine learning model we introduce, this is a great place to do so because we theoretically would have the best picture of our individual customers here. Not only that, is there's this promise that we can take that prediction and activate on it more quickly in any one of these platforms that we might be working with. In reality, CDPs are very new. Your organizations are probably thinking about adopting one now or in the process of beginning to adopt one now. But I mention that now because while there is this promise of identity resolution and activation, in reality, they're all a little bit different and they're going to have different capabilities here. And some will have this automated machine learning built in that I'm talking about, but even the ones that don't will absolutely have this ability to ingest a model prediction and allow you to activate more quickly. So just something to keep in mind there as well. We could probably spend hours talking about only CDP, but we'll save that for another session. So I mentioned a little bit before that internal resources and teams are a really important part of how we sort of develop this strategy. The first thing that I'll say here is that if we want to be able to do truly customized machine learning and import our custom model predictions into our tech stack somewhere, that all four of these roles will be important to have and not only exist within the organization, but also have these groups closely communicating with each other. And now I'll say first too, that these are kind of pseudo roles. Like, there's probably several different titles within your organization that may align with the function that these roles would serve. But just to give an example of how we see that cohesiveness not always existing within the organization, I've worked with organizations that have, a very clear, singular tech stack. Maybe they're working entirely with a tool like Salesforce or something like that across the board. They have all of these roles, but our marketing strategists never really get the opportunity to work with the data scientists. The data scientist plate's very full. Marketing's projects tend to get deprioritized. So there's no real clear path to activation, or that can just keeps getting kicked down the road until the data scientists eventually get time. One solution for a challenge like that, maybe because this is, again, something I'm sure we've seen in a lot of our organizations, like one data scientist or one small team of data scientists carrying the whole weight of the whole organization. Maybe in this case, the marketing strategist and marketing analyst could use these more automated tools, get a small fraction of the data scientist's time to validate the model, help with a little bit of that feature engineering up front or feature selection up front. And then basically we've saved everybody a little bit of time. We've given marketing a quicker path to activation, but we've also gotten enough input from that data scientist to make sure that we have a valid model that we're putting into production. The data engineer I also call out here because this is just something that we see as often overlooked. There is data engineering that is back-end database management and really sort of what we traditionally consider data engineering. But one thing that we often see, even when we're dealing with sort of that cohesive tech stack, is that activation can be tough from channel to channel. We need to, convert this CSV into sort of individual JSON lines that are imported into the platform. And that's sort of like a different definition of data engineering that a lot of organizations aren't traditionally thinking through. So this sort of connection between our marketing teams and sort of what you would consider almost marketing data engineers is really important too, if we want to truly be able to activate customized models. So with that, we'll jump into sort of our third factor, our third evaluation factor. And I think that this one is pretty straightforward. Time to activation, right? We hate to rush any sort of model design or development. But sometimes there are things, there are sales goals or events that are coming up or new product launches. And if we want to be able to leverage these new capabilities, we have to follow sort of that schedule. So I would say the simple takeaway here is that these sort of more automated machine learning tools that are built into the tech stack are going to be faster. That's just their purpose. They're designed to sort of eliminate some of the friction throughout the organization and create a quicker path to conversion. Now, if you're kind of reading between the lines here, this is where we really break down some of those trade-offs between the automated machine learning and going with a more custom approach. And this is sort of a broad observation within individual channels. I'm sure there's exceptions to each one of these rules, but something very commonly that we see as a negative of going with this automated approach is, we don't really get to understand feature importance in a real meaningful way. Things like feature drift, as my model goes out into production, does one feature have more or less predictive value, or is it sort of affecting the model's classification process? And then the last thing here is, especially if you're dealing with something that's very automated, that's only looking at sort of data within my CDP and coming up with interesting clusters, you're going to have a much smaller feature set. We're not going to have that ability to do some really interesting sort of feature engineering that we might do with a more customized model. But there is some good that comes with this. One thing that we see with a lot of these sort of built-in tools is that they have pretty good tuning and validation processes built in, right? So, a giant organization like Adobe or Salesforce or Google wouldn't create sort of automated machine learning processes without some of these basics built in. So there is that trade-off. The last thing here, and this is where I mentioned that idea of like, maybe your data scientist only has limited availability. So if we can get them working with the marketing team for a short period of time, there's no substitute for some of the feature engineering that has to happen and some exploratory data analysis. So just keeping in mind that getting some input from someone who understands the data science process before we even use any of these auto machine learning tools is going to be very important as well. I want to talk a little bit as our fourth factor here about data depth and clarity. And this is really what I mentioned before as this depth and breadth of data. As we think about breadth, we're thinking about how many different channels do I have and how many of those different channels are really integrated so that I can see a picture of a user across individual channels. Sales CRM data, ad data, call center, web analytics. These are all things that can be joined with clear user identifiers so we really understand what one user looks like, but it doesn't happen automatically. There's typically some engineering that has to happen to get there. And then with that, we also have that sort of depth, which is where we're talking about how much tracking or how many features do I have within an individual source? How accurate are they? Which is a huge consideration, especially when we're dealing with things like web analytics. There's the ability for that data to not always come through correctly. So ensuring that we've gone through to validate that data is very important. And then availability too. Like I mentioned lag here as our last piece. Maybe I have one platform that's ingesting real-time data, but another one that has a 24-hour lag on anything that comes through related to an individual user. That's going to affect my ability to use that data. So that really kind of translates to this matrix over here on the right of source depth and number of integrated sources, where we've kind of made this like auto ML effectiveness zone. As I have more integrated sources and more depth, it's easier to use these auto ML tools. Now, again, this is not a rule. This is not clearly a scientific drawing to scale, but just sort of a general idea of where we've seen these auto ML algorithms become effective. With our last little bit here, I want to jump over to our last factor, which is this importance of prediction. This is kind of a controversial one, but this is where I like to mention that, you know, in digital marketing, it's not really life or death. We're not doing data science at a place where we need a p-value similar to what we would need in the medical industry or in the medical field. So I like to just make sure that we're thinking through any of the scenarios where we would be applying machine learning and saying, hey, you know, I can maybe afford to use this automated built-in machine learning, which may not be perfect because what I'm improving upon is a random guess. And there's not really much to be lost from introducing something new here. A quick example is our first one here. I'll just go through the first and last scenario here. The first scenario, and these are all things that we've seen before, you know, our sales team randomly selects new leads to follow up on, and we want to prioritize. So this is a case where we built a propensity model to have the sales team follow up on what we believed were the highest likely to convert leads. Now, there was nothing to be lost if that model didn't perform well. The last one is, you know, hey, we believe that some of our site users would be motivated to convert by a different website experience. Now, at this point, we're starting to mess with our brand. You know, if we're not confident in our model's ability to understand what would lead to a user converting, we may do more harm to our brand than good by really changing the website in a dramatic way. So with that ends our 5 factors, and I think that puts me at time here and leaves us with about 4 minutes for questions as we finish up.
What a great job. Thank you so much, Tyler. I greatly appreciate that. It was a learning experience for me as well, but that was phenomenal. I just want to thank you all for attending today's session. From 11 to 12 today, please make sure you join our sponsors in the technology showcase. DQE Communications will be presenting SD-WAN for your business. Jester will feature Mark Migulin, Director of Partner Alliance Engineering from Western Digital, who will be presenting. Using Superfast OpenFlex, our other sponsors will be in their booths to connect with you and answer your questions. And we will have general networking in the networking room. You may access all of these sessions in SCED. In addition, tomorrow at 9 a.m., we're going to hear from our keynote speakers, Badao Magana and Francio Harlette from PNC, who will present Building the AA Powered Bank, leveraging advanced analytics to transform the business of banking. So I hope you get out there and enjoy some sunshine today on some breaks. But other than that, just have a great day and thank you for joining us.
Thanks, guys. Much appreciated.
Great job, Tyler. Have a great day.
You too. Thanks.